At 14, my parents dropped me off on a porch like unwanted furniture and never looked back. 15 years of silence later, I inherited everything. Now they are banging on my door, crying about fairness and demanding I fund their new families. I just laughed. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that had settled over the Victorian estate the moment Arthur's heart stopped beating. For the last 48 hours, since the paramedics had quietly packed up their gear and the coroner's van had pulled away down the gravel driveway, I had been existing in a state of suspended animation. I walked through the hallway, my bare feet making no sound on the Persian runners that Arthur had taught me to clean with vinegar and water so the colors wouldn't fade. Everything in this house, every object, every creaking floorboard was a memory of him. He wasn't just my grandfather. For the last 15 years, he had been my entire world. My father, my mentor, my best friend. I stopped at the entrance to the sunroom, his sanctuary, and eventually mine. The humid, earthy smell of damp soil and blooming orchids hit me, a stark contrast to the sterile smell of grief that seemed to cling to the rest of the house. I picked up a spray bottle, my fingers trembling slightly. I needed to miss the monstera. He would have been upset if the humidity dropped. "I've got it, Arthur," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm taking care of them." The doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite, tentative ring of a neighbor bringing a casserole. It was a long, insistent press, followed by a sharp, impatient rapping on the heavy oak wood. I froze. I wasn't expecting the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, until tomorrow. The funeral director had already come and gone. Who would be pounding on the door of a grieving house at 10 in the morning? I set the spray bottle down on the wicker table, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked slowly to the foyer. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see two silhouettes. They looked distorted, warped by the glass, but something about the posture of the taller one sent a jolt of cold electricity down my spine. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. The bright morning sun blinded me for a second. When my eyes adjusted, I felt the blood drain from my face so fast it made me dizzy. Standing on the porch were a man and a woman. They were older than I remembered, their faces lined with age and the kind of stress that comes from living beyond one's means, but I knew them instantly. The woman was wearing a black dress that was too tight and too short for a funeral call, her blonde hair teased high. The man wore a suit that looked expensive from a distance, but cheap up close, his tie slightly askew. Sylvia and Joseph, my parents. I hadn't seen them since the day they left me here with a duffel bag and a promise to call when we get settled. That was 15 years ago. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I already knew the answer. I didn't step back. I didn't invite them in. I stood like a statue in the doorway, blocking the entrance to the only home I had known since they discarded me. Sylvia squinted at me, her head tilting to the side. Is the housekeeper in? We're looking for Arthur's granddaughter. Or, well, is Arthur?" She trailed off, looking past me into the foyer. She didn't recognize me. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I was 29 years old. I had her nose, I had his eyes. And yet, to them, I was a stranger. "He's dead," Joseph said abruptly, cutting her off. He looked at me with impatient eyes. "Look, miss, we're his son and daughter-in-law. Well, ex-daughter-in-law. We need to come in and assess the situation. There are arrangements to be made, property to secure." He tried to push past me. I planted my feet. I wasn't the scared 14-year-old girl crying in the driveway anymore. I was the woman who had nursed Arthur through 3 years of cancer. I was the woman who managed this estate. "He passed away 2 days ago," I said, my voice hardening, "and you're not coming in." Sylvia blinked, finally looking at me instead of through me. "Excuse me, do you know who we are? We are the family. We have rights. Who are you two?" I'm Lucy, I said. The name hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. Sylvia's mouth dropped open. Joseph froze, his hand still raised as if to push the door. He squinted, scanning my face, looking for the child he had abandoned. Lucy, Sylvia gasped, a hand flying to her chest in a theatrical gesture of shock. Oh my God, look at you. You look so differ. NT, older. People tend to age in 15 years, Sylvia, I said coldly. Well, Joseph said, clearing his throat, recovering his composure much faster than she did. He adjusted his tie, a mask of solemnity sliding over his face. This is unexpected, but good. You're here. That makes things easier. Move aside, Lucy. We have a lot of work to do. The funeral isn't going to plan itself, and we need to find the financial records immediately. Why? I asked. Because, Joseph said, stepping forward until he was inches from my face, his cologne overpowering the scent of the garden, we are his heirs, and we have been kept in the dark long enough. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, finding out from a Facebook post that my father died. Now move. I didn't move. In fact, I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. They hadn't called on my 16th birthday. They hadn't called when I graduated high school or college. They hadn't called when Arthur had his first stroke or his second. But they were here now, 48 hours after his death, ready to find the financial records. You found out on Facebook? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. That's interesting, considering Mr. Henderson called both of the numbers we had on file for you. One was disconnected, and the other went to a voicemail for a Tiffany. Joseph's face flushed a deep, ugly red. That's my wife. She didn't give me the message. And I've been busy, Sylvia chimed in, smoothing her dress. My design business is booming, Lucy. I can't just be by the phone all day. But the moment we heard, well, family comes first. Family, I repeated the word, tasting the bile in my throat. Lucy, please, Sylvia said, adopting a tone she used to use when she wanted a discount at a store, sweet, wheedling, and entirely fake. We're all grieving here. I know you're upset, but we are your parents. We're here to take the burden off you. You shouldn't have to handle an estate this size alone. It's too much for a young woman. She tried to reach out and touch my arm. I flinched back as if she were a hot stove. I've been handling this estate for 5 years, I said. I managed his medical bills. I managed the grounds crew. I managed the seed archive. I don't need your help. Joseph huffed, a sound of pure dismissal. Gardening isn't managing an estate, Lucy. We're talking about assets, liquid capital, real estate. This house alone is worth, what, 2 million, maybe 2.5 in this market? He looked up at the intricate woodwork of the porch, his eyes gleaming not with tears, but with calculation. It's going to take a lot of work to get it ready for sale. The market is cooling off. We need to list it fast. Sale, I asked. Who said anything about selling? It's the only logical step, Joseph said, checking his watch. We can't split a house 3 ways. Liquidating is the only fair way to handle the inheritance. Sylvia has debts, obligations, and I have a family to think about. Your brothers need security. My brothers. The words hit me harder than the initial shock of seeing them. I knew, vaguely, that they had both remarried. Arthur had hired a private investigator years ago, just to keep tabs, mostly to ensure they wouldn't try to come back and steal me away when I was a minor. I knew Joseph had 2 sons with Tiffany. I knew Sylvia had a daughter with her new husband. I had siblings I had never met. Siblings who, apparently, had received the fathering I was denied. My brothers, I said, letting the sarcasm drip. Right, the ones you didn't leave on a porch. Joseph's jaw tightened. That was a difficult time for us, Lucy. You were old enough to understand. We needed space to figure our lives out. We knew Arthur would take care of you. And look, he gestured grandly at the house. He did. You lived in a mansion. You went to private school. Don't act like you were a victim. You lived the high life while we struggled to rebuild. Struggled? I raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call it? Because Arthur showed me the credit card statements you tried to stick him with before he cut you off. That is ancient history, Sylvia snapped, her mask slipping. Stop being so petty, Lucy. We are here now. We are your family. And whether you like it or not, the law is the law. We are his next of kin. You're just the granddaughter. The estate goes to the children first. That's how it works. She tried to push past me again, and this time, Joseph joined her, using his shoulder to leverage the door. They were physically invading my space, their greed making them bold. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said, not budging. Or what? Joseph sneered. You'll call the police on your own father. I'll call the police on the trespassers, I corrected. But before you embarrass yourselves further, you shoo. LD know that Mr. Henderson is coming tomorrow for the reading of the will. Until then, nobody enters this house without my permission. And right now, you don't have it. Joseph glared at me, his face inches from mine. You're playing a dangerous game, little girl. You think because you changed his bedpans for a few years you're entitled to the lion's share? We'll contest it. We'll tie this up in court for years. You won't see a dime until you're 40. I don't care about the money, I lied. I cared very much about the money, but not for the reasons they thought. I cared because it was Arthur's legacy, and I would burn it to ash before I let them use it to buy sports cars and pay off their gambling debts. We'll be back tomorrow, Sylvia hissed, stepping back. With a lawyer of our own. And Lucy, don't think you can hide anything. We know he had safes. We know he had offshore accounts. Be here at 10, I said, and slammed the heavy oak door in their faces. I leaned back against the wood, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I listened to their muffled voices arguing on the porch, then the sound of a car, engines starting and gravel crunching as they drove away. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest. They were so confident, so sure of their place in the world. They thought they held all the cards because they were the children and I was just the leftover granddaughter. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Arthur hadn't just taught me how to grow orchids, he had taught me how to keep records. I sat on the floor of the foyer for a long time, letting the adrenaline fade into a dull, throbbing ache. The house felt violated. Their scent, his musk, her cloying floral perfume, lingered in the air, contaminating the sanctity of Arthur's home. My mind drifted back to the day they left. I was 14. It was a Tuesday. I remembered the weather perfectly. It was overcast, the sky a bruised purple, threatening a storm that never broke. I had come home from school to find suitcases in the hallway. I assumed we were going on a trip. Lucy, honey, Sylvia had said, not looking at me. She was packing her makeup bag. Your father and I, we need to go away for a while, separately. Where am I going? I had asked, clutching my backpack straps. You're going to stay with Grandpa Arthur, Joseph had said. He was already by the door, checking his reflection in the hall mirror. It's better this way. He has the room, he has the money. We can't take care of you right now, not with everything going on. They drove me to Arthur's house, dropped my bags on the porch, and didn't even turn off the engine. I watched 2 separate cars drive in 2 separate directions. I stood there for an hour before Arthur opened the door. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at me, looked at the empty driveway, and his face hardened into a mask of stone that I wouldn't see crack for years. Come inside, Lucy, he had said gently. You're home now. He never spoke their names again unless it was necessary. He never made excuses for them. He just stepped in. He went to every parent-teacher conference. He taught me how to drive. He sat up with me when I had my heart broken for the first time. He taught me that family isn't about whose DNA you share, but who stays when things get hard. And now, the people who left were back to collect a paycheck for a job they quit 15 years ago. I stood up, my knees cracking, and walked into the library. It was a dark, mahogany-paneled room filled with books and legal files. Arthur had been a real estate developer, a ruthless one in his prime, but he had a code of ethics he lived by. Contract is king, he used to say. I walked over to the desk and sat in his leather chair. It still smelled like his pipe tobacco. Joseph was going to be the problem. Sylvia was greedy, but she was scatterbrained. She would follow the money. Joseph, however, was desperate. I knew about his life. Arthur's private investigator, a man named Mr. Klein, sent us a report every year. It was our grim little tradition. Joseph, age 55. Profession, corporate sales manager for a mid-tier software company. Income, $120,000 heavily garnished. He had remarried Tiffany, a woman 15 years his junior who had expensive taste and zero income. They had 2 sons, aged 10 and 12, both in private schools Joseph couldn't afford. They lived in a leased McMansion in the suburbs, driven by the need to appear wealthy. He was drowning in credit card debt and had a second mortgage he was hiding from Tiffany. He wasn't just grieving, he was hunting. He needed this inheritance to keep his house of cards from collapsing. He felt entitled to it not just because he was Arthur's son, but because he believed the world owed him for his struggles. I opened the top drawer of the desk. There, sitting on top of a stack of papers, was a small, leather-bound notebo. Okay, Arthur had started writing in it the day my parents dropped me off. I flipped it open. The handwriting was jagged, angry. August 14th, 2009. They left her. They actually left her. My own son is a coward. I looked in her eyes and saw the terror of abandonment. I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never feels that again, and I will make sure they never profit from her pain. I closed the book. Joseph thought he was fighting a naive 29-year-old botanist who spent her days talking to ferns. He thought he could bully me with his loud voice and his suit and his talk of legal rights. He didn't know that Arthur had spent the last decade preparing me for this exact war. He didn't know about the trust structures. He didn't know about the video files stored on the encrypted drive in the safe. And he certainly didn't know that I had the letters. I reached into the back of the drawer and pulled out a bundle tied with twine. There were dozens of them. Letters I had written to Joseph and Sylvia during that first year, begging them to call, telling them about school, telling them I missed them. Every single one was unopened. Stamped across the front in red ink were the words, "Return to sender." I ran my thumb over the red ink. "You want fairness, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you fairness." The morning of the will reading, I woke up before the sun. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the color of old bruises. I didn't go to the kitchen for coffee. I went straight to the greenhouse. This was my ritual. It was where I found clarity. I walked down the rows of Paphioptilum orchids, checking the moisture levels of the moss. Arthur had taught me that orchids were like people, resilient, yes, but temperamental. If you ignored them, they wouldn't die immediately. They would just stop blooming. They would exist, green and leafy, but they would never thrive. My parents had left me to wither. Arthur had watered me, fed me, and given me the light I needed to bloom. I reached the back of the greenhouse, where the recovery table stood. This was where we kept the plants we rescued from estate sales or negligent owners. I picked up a withered fern, its fronds brown and crispy. "Today's the day," I whispered to the plant. "We're going to prune the rot." I went back inside and showered, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, washing away the lingering feeling of Joseph's proximity from the day before. I dressed not in black, but in a deep, hunter green suit, Arthur's favorite color. I pulled my hair back into a severe bun. I wasn't dressing as a grieving granddaughter today. I was dressing as the CEO of the estate. At 9:00 a.m., an hour before the scheduled meeting, Mr. Henderson arrived. He was a man cut from the same cloth as Arthur, old school, meticulous, and utterly unimpressed by theatrics. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived a war. He set it down on the dining room table and looked at me over his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Are you ready for this, Lucy?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I've dealt with Joseph before. He's going to be loud." "I'm counting on it," I said, pouring him a cup of black coffee. "Did you bring the supplementary file?" Henderson nodded. He tapped the briefcase. The PI reports from the last fiscal year, the updated debt consolidation regarding Joseph's second mortgage, and the lien on Sylvia's design studio. It's all here. Arthur wanted you to have the ammunition, but he hoped you wouldn't have to use it. He knew I would, I said, taking a sip of my tea. Arthur knew them better than anyone. He knew they wouldn't come for the funeral. He knew they would come for the check. There is one more thing, Henderson said, his expression darkening. He opened the briefcase and slid a thin, manila envelope across the polished mahogany. This came to my office yesterday via courier. It's from Joseph's attorney, a man named Bleekman. I picked up the envelope. It felt light, insignificant. I tore it open and scanned the single sheet of legal paper inside. Notice of intent to contest. It was a preemptive strike. They were claiming that in his final years, Arthur was suffering from diminished capacity and undue influence from his caretaker, me. They were alleging that I had isolated him to manipulate the estate planning. I let out a short, sharp laugh. Undue influence? He was doing the New York Times crossword in pen until 3 days before he died. It's a standard shakedown tactic, Henderson said, taking the paper back and sliding it into his file. They want to scare you into a settlement. They think you're a young woman who doesn't want her grandfather's name dragged through the mud, so you'll pay them a few $100,000 to go away. They really don't know me at all, I said. No, Henderson agreed. They don't, and that is your greatest advantage. Now, regarding the trust. We stick to the plan, I interrupt. Ed, read the will exactly as Arthur wrote it. Let them think what they want for the first 10 minutes. I want to see their faces when the trap snaps shut. I stood up and walked to the window. A silver Mercedes SUV was pulling into the driveway, followed closely by a red sports car that looked ridiculous for a man of Joseph's age. They're here, I said. Showtime. I directed Henderson to set up in the library. It was an intimidation tactic. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling books, dark wood, and heavy drapes. It was a room that demanded respect. I sat at the head of the long conference table. Henderson sat to my right. Joseph and Sylvia entered together, though the tension between them was palpable. Joseph looked haggard, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the value of the paintings on the walls. Sylvia was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, clutching a designer bag that I recognized as a fake. The stitching on the handle was wrong. They didn't bring lawyers. That was their first mistake. They were arrogant enough to think they could handle me alone. Let's get this over with, Joseph said, pulling out a chair at the opposite end of the table. He didn't look at me. He looked at Henderson. Mr. Henderson, it's been a long time. I assume you have the checks prepared. Henderson didn't blink. He opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately arranging 3 stacks of paper on the table. The silence stretched out, agonizingly long, until Sylvia finally cracked. Is there coffee? She asked, her voice high and tight. No, I said. Joseph slammed his hand on the table. Enough of this. Read the damn will. Henderson cleared his throat. He picked up the document, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. I, Arthur William Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. He went through the standard legal jargon, the payment of debts, the funeral arrangements. Joseph was tapping his foot rhythmically, a nervous tick I remembered from my childhood. Sylvia was scrolling on her phone under the table. Article IV, Distribution of Assets, Henderson read. Joseph sat up straighter. Sylvia put the phone down. To my son, Joseph Blackwood, and my former daughter-in-law, Sylvia Miller. They both leaned forward, practically salivating. I leave the sum of $1 each. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Joseph blinked. Excuse me, I think I misheard you. $1, Henderson repeated calmly, to be paid from the petty cash account. That's impossible, Joseph roared, jumping to his feet. His chair flew back and hit the bookshelf with a loud crack. That's illegal. You can't disinherit your own children. I am his son. I am his blood. And I was his daughter-in-law for 20 years. Sylvia shrieked, her face flushing a blotchy red. I gave him a granddaughter. This is a mistake, a clerical error. Arthur would never do this. Sit down, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their shouting like a knife. You, Joseph pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. You poisoned him against us. You witch. You spent 15 years whispering lies in his ear while we were out there trying to survive. Survive? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Is that what you call it? We know about the undue influence, Sylvia cried, grasping at straws. We know you manipulated him. He was old, he was confused. He was neither, Henderson interjected smoothly. And if you would let me finish, there is a caveat. Joseph froze. A caveat? What caveat? The will stipulates, Henderson continued, looking down at the paper, that the entirety of the estate, valued at approximately $1.3 million in liquid assets, plus the property and the seed archive, is to be placed into the Lucy Blackwood Trust. However, he paused for effect. The trust has a provision. The trustee, who is Lucy, has the sole discretion to disperse funds to family members if they can prove, with physical documentation, that they provided financial, emotional, or physical support to the beneficiary. Lucy, between the years of 2009 and 2024. Joseph's face went pale. He sank back into his chair. Prove, he whispered. Yes, I said. I stood up and walked over to the sideboard where I had placed a small wooden box. It's a fairness clause, Dad. You like fairness, right? Grandpa Arthur thought it was only fair that you get back exactly what you put in. This is ridiculous, Sylvia spat. We supported you, we sent gifts, we called. Did you? I asked. I opened the box. Because I have the phone records, Sylvia. From 2009 to 2015, Arthur requested the logs every month. Do you know how many incoming calls there were from your number? She stared at me, her mouth working silently. 0, I said. Not one, not on Christmas, not on my birthday, not when I was hospitalized with pneumonia when I was 17. We were busy, Joseph shouted, slamming his fist on the table again. Life is complicated, Lucy. You don't understand the pressure we were under. The recession hit us hard. The recession? I laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. Is that why you leased a Porsche in 2011? Is that why you took a vacation to Cabo in 2012? We saw the Facebook photos, Joseph. Arthur saw them. He was spying on us. Joseph looked horrified. He was protecting me, I corrected. He wanted to know if you were ever coming back. He waited. We both waited. For the first year, I sat by that window every single day waiting for your car to pull into the driveway. Arthur sat with me, and when you didn't show up, he stopped waiting, and he started calculating. This is a setup, Joseph muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. You trapped us. I didn't trap you, I said. Your own actions trapped you. You're just finally stepping into the cage. The atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to desperation. Joseph wasn't yelling anymore. He was calculating. I could see the gears turning in his head. He realized that bluster wouldn't work, so he switched tactics. He decided to go for the guilt. Lucy, he said, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone. He leaned across the table, clasping his hands together. Okay, look, maybe we weren't perfect. Maybe we made mistakes. We were young, we were selfish. I admit that. You were 40, I pointed out. He ignored me. But this isn't about us anymore. It's about your brothers, Liam and Noah. They are innocent in this. They are your flesh and blood. Do you know that Liam is a chess champion? Do you know Noah wants to be a botanist just like you? He was lying. I knew from the Pi report that Noah was on academic probation and wanted to be a Twitch streamer, but I let him talk. They are struggling, Lucy, Joseph continued, his eyes glistening with fake tears. I've had financial setbacks. The market has been brutal. If I don't get an infusion of cash, we might lose the house. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want your little brothers to be homeless because you're holding a grudge against me? It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt a twinge of pity. And my daughter, Sylvia chimed in, catching on. Bella, she's 7, she needs braces. She needs stability. Lucy, you have over $1 million. You can't possibly need all of that. We're just asking for our fair share. For the kids. I looked at them. They were using children I had never met, children they had raised instead of me, as human shields. That's heartbreaking, I said flatly. Truly. So you'll help? Joseph asked, hope lighting up his eyes. We don't need it all, just split it. 30% each for us, 40 for you. That's generous, right? We'll sign whatever you want. I looked at Henderson. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I have a question first, I said. Anything, Joseph said. If you're so worried about Liam and Noah losing their home, I said, reaching into Henderson's briefcase and pulling out a blue file folder. Why did you empty their college savings accounts 3 months ago? Joseph froze. The color drained from his face completely this time, leaving him looking gray and old. What? He croaked. The 529 plans, I said, opening the file. Mr. Klein, our investigator, is very thorough. You drained $40,000 from your son's education funds, and that same week, you made a $40,000 payment to a luxury consultation firm based in Las Vegas. That's a bookie, isn't it, Joseph? A silence. And Sylvia, I turned to her. She flinched. You say Bella needs braces? Then why is your Instagram full of unboxing videos for handbags that cost $3,000 each? You're not broke, Sylvia. You're over-leveraged. You're drowning in consumer debt because you're trying to impress people who don't care about you. You have no right to look at our finances, Sylvia screeched, standing up. That is an invasion of privacy. I'll sue you. You came to my house demanding my money, I said, my voice rising for the first time. You made your finances my business. You want to talk about fairness? Fairness is Arthur spending his retirement savings to put me through college because my parents wouldn't sign the FAFSA forms. Fairness is me spending my 20s changing his IV bags while you were playing perfect family in the suburbs. We are your parents, Joseph roared, slamming his hands on the table again, leaning so far forward he was almost spitting on me. We gave you life, you owe us. I owe you nothing. I slammed my hand down on the stack of returned letters. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. You returned me like a defective product. Look at these. I grabbed the bundle of letters and threw them across the table. They scattered, sliding over the polished wood. Some fell to the floor. The red return to sender stamps seemed to glow in the dim light. Read the dates, Joseph, I challenged him. October 2009. Please come get me. November 2009. I promise I'll be good. January 2010. Happy New Year, I miss you. You didn't even open them. You just marked them refused and put them back in the mailbox. Joseph looked down at the letters scattered before him. He picked one up, his hand trembling. He stared at his own handwriting on the envelope, the angry, hurried scrawl of return to sender. He started, his voice shaking. I never saw these. Tiffany, she handles the mail. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Tiffany didn't live with you in 2009. You were living alone in that apartment downtown. You did this. You. Sylvia was sobbing now, but they were crocodile tears. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she realized the money was slipping away. This isn't over, Joseph said, dropping the letter. His eyes were hard again, the sadness replaced by a vicious, cornered animal look. You think some old letters and a few bank statements scare me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have rights. I have a lawyer who will tear this will apart. We'll freeze your assets. We'll make sure you spend every penny of that $1 million on legal fees. Go ahead, I said. Try. Oh, we will, Joseph sneered. And we're not just going to sue you, Lucy. We're going to expose you. We'll tell everyone how you manipulated a dying old man. We'll tell the family. We'll tell the community. Actually, I said, checking my watch, That reminds me, you mentioned the family, the extended family, Aunt Marge, Uncle Bob, the cousins. What about them? Sylvia sniffled. They're all coming here at noon, I said. For the memorial luncheon, I invited them, and I think it's time we had a little family meeting. Don't you? Joseph's eyes widened. You wouldn't. I would, I said, standing up. In fact, I insist. Stick around, Mom and Dad. The audience is just arriving. By noon, the driveway was full. It was a parade of sedans and SUVs, the gathering of the Blackwood clan. I watched from the library window as cousins, aunts, and uncles filtered into the house, dressed in their somber grays and blacks. Aunt Marge, Arthur's younger sister, was the first to enter. She was a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and a cane she used more for pointing than walking. She had always been kind to me, in her own distant way, but she lived in Florida and rarely visited. Joseph and Sylvia were already in the foyer, transforming before my eyes. Gone were the snarling wolves who had been demanding money 10 minutes ago. In their place stood the grieving son and the supportive ex-wife. Aunt Marge, Joseph exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her, careful to look like he was holding back tears. It's so good to see you. Under terrible circumstances, of course. Terrible. Joseph, Marge said, eyeing him critically. I was surprised to see your car. Arthur told me last Christmas you hadn't spoken in a decade. Joseph didn't miss a beat. Oh, you know how Dad was. He could be stubborn. We were trying to reconcile privately. I didn't want to burden the rest of the family with our struggles, but I was here at the end. In spirit, at least. I stood in the doorway of the library, watching the performance. It was nauseatingly good. Sylvia was over by the buffet table, crying into a tissue while talking to Uncle Bob, undoubtedly spinning a tale of how she had always loved Arthur like a father. They were working the room. They were planting the seeds of their narrative. Arthur was senile, Lucy isolated him, we are the rightful heirs trying to save the family legacy. I let them do it. I let them shake every hand. I let them eat the shrimp cocktails and drink the expensive wine. I waited until everyone was seated in the grand dining room, the murmur of conversation filling the high-ceilinged space. Then I walked to the head of the table. I didn't tap a glass with a spoon, I just stood there, waiting. The silence started near me and rippled outward until the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. Thank you all for coming, I said. My voice was steady, projected clearly to the back of the room. Arthur would have hated this fuss, but he loved his family. He loved loyalty. He certainly did, Joseph boomed from the side of the room, raising his glass. To Arthur, a complicated man but a great one. He was complicated, I agreed, turning my gaze to Joseph. He was a man who kept meticulous records. As you all know, there has been some confusion regarding the estate. A ripple of whispers went through the room. Joseph's smile faltered slightly. My father and mother, I gestured to them, have expressed concerns that Arthur wasn't in his right mind when he wrote his will. They believe I unduly influenced him to cut them out. Lucy, this isn't the time, Sylvia hissed, her eyes darting around the room. We can discuss this privately. No, I said. We discussed it privately. Now we discuss it as a family, because you've been telling Aunt Marge and Uncle Bob that you were trying to reconcile. You've been telling them that you were kept away by a vindictive granddaughter. It's the truth, Joseph shouted, deciding to double down. He stepped forward, addressing the room. She blocked our calls, she turned him against us. We are his flesh and blood, and she manipulated a dying man to steal our inheritance. The room gasped. Aunt Marge looked from Joseph to me, confusion knitting her brow. I thought you might say that, I said, which is why I think Arthur should speak for himself. I nodded to Mr. Henderson, who was standing by the large television monitor we had set up in the corner. He pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. It was a video recording, dated 6 months ago. Arthur was sitting in his favorite armchair in the sunroom, looking frail but sharp-eyed. He was looking directly into the lens. Hello, Arthur's voice filled the room. It was like a ghost passing through us. I saw Uncle Bob wipe a tear. If you are watching this, I am gone. And if my calculations are correct, my son Joseph and his ex-wife Sylvia are currently in the room, likely wearing expensive clothes they can't afford, drinking my wine, and telling you all how much they miss me. Joseph went white. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. On the screen, Arthur chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. Let me be clear. My mind is sound. My heart is broken, but my mind is sound. I have left everything to Lucy not because she is my granddaughter, but because she is the only one who stayed. Arthur leaned forward in the video, his expression hardening. Joseph, you abandoned your 14-year-old daughter on my porch like a bag of trash. You didn't call for 15 years. I kept a log. I waited. She waited. You never came. And now you want my money? You want to pay off your gambling debts with the legacy I built. Turn it off, Joseph screamed, lunging toward the TV. It's a fake, it's AI, she made it with a computer. Uncle Bob stood up, blocking Joseph's path. Sit down, Joseph, let the man speak. I know about the debts, Video Arthur continued. I know about the second mortgage. I know you stole from your own son's college funds. You are a leech, Joseph, and Sylvia, you are no better. You chose your vanity over your child. Arthur took a deep breath on screen. To my extended family, Marge, Bob, do not let them lie to you. They are not here for me. They are here for the check. And they aren't getting a dime. Lucy, if they are there, show them the box. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and electrified. I picked up the wooden box of letters from the sideboard and walked over to Aunt Marge. I handed her the stack. What are these? She whispered. Letters I wrote to them the year they left me, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I wrote every week. I sent photos. I sent report cards. Marge flipped through the envelopes. Her hands started to shake. She looked at the red ink stamped across every single one. Return to sender, she read aloud, her voice trembling with fury. Refused. She looked up at Joseph, who was standing frozen near the window, his face a mask of horror. You refused her letters, Marge asked, her voice rising to a shout. She was a child, your own child. You didn't just leave her, you erased her. It was a misunderstanding, Sylvia wailed, the facade completely crumbling now. We were moving, the mail got messed up. For a year, I asked. For 15 years. We have families, Joseph yelled, desperate now, turning to the room with his hands out. We have children who need support. My boys, they didn't do anything wrong. Why should they suffer because of this? Is that fairness? Is it fair that Lucy sits on $1 million while her brothers might lose their home? He turned to me, his eyes pleading manic. Lucy, please forget about us. Think of your brothers. They are your family. We are your family. You can't just turn your back on family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had driven away when I was 14 without a backward glance. I looked at the woman who had cared more about her fresh start than her daughter's safety. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You want me to support your new families, I said slowly. You want me to pay for the children you actually decided to keep. Yes, Joseph breathed. Just help us for them. I leaned in close, so he could see the absolute resolve in my eyes. Funny, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. I don't remember being part of yours. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Aunt Marge didn't just get angry, she went nuclear. She stood up, walked over to Joseph, and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the dining room, shocking in its violence. Get out, she said. Her voice was low, trembling with a lifetime of disappointment. Get out of this house. You are a disgrace to the name. Marge, you don't understand, Joseph stammered, holding his cheek. I understand perfectly, Uncle Bob said, stepping up beside his sister. Arthur told us you were estranged. He was too kind to tell us the details. Now we know. You didn't just drift apart. You threw your daughter away. We're leaving, Sylvia sobbed, grabbing her fake designer bag. Come on, Joseph. These people are crazy. We'll see you in court, Lucy. You'll hear from my lawyer. Your lawyer? Mr. Henderson stepped forward, checking his watch. Actually, Sylvia, I believe your lawyer dropped you about 20 minutes ago. My office sent over the proof of your insolvency and the attempt to defraud the estate. He doesn't work on contingency for cases he knows he can't win. Sylvia froze. She looked at Joseph. Joseph looked at the floor. And Joseph, Henderson continued, relentless, I suggest you check your phone. I took the liberty of forwarding the PI report regarding your luxury consultation payments to your wife, Tiffany. I believe she had some questions about where the Children's College Fund went. Joseph's phone buzzed in his pocket, then it buzzed again, and again, a torrent of notifications. He pulled it out, stared at the screen for a second, and the color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. You ruined me, he whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. No, Dad, I said, crossing my arms. I just turned on the lights. You were the one standing in the filth. They left. There was no grand exit, no final dramatic speech. They just shuffled out the door, defeated, small, and utterly alone. The sound of their cars starting and driving away was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of hugs and apologies from the extended family. Aunt Marge held me for a long time, crying, promising that I would never be alone again. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years gave me their numbers, genuinely wanting to reconnect. Arthur's plan had worked perfectly. He hadn't just given me the money, he had given me the truth. He had cleansed the wound so it could finally heal. 3 months later, I sat in the greenhouse, repotting the monstera that had started it all. The late afternoon sun filtered through the glass, turning the room into a kaleidoscope of gold and green. The house was quiet, but it was a good quiet now. It was peaceful. Mr. Henderson had stopped by earlier with the final paperwork. The contest to the will had been dismissed with prejudice. Joseph hadn't even shown up to the hearing. According to the grapevine, mostly Aunt Marge, who had taken up the role of family gossip with gusto, Joseph's life had imploded. Tiffany had filed for divorce and taken the boys. She was suing him for the misuse of the college funds. He had been let go from his job after creditors started garnishing his wages directly. He was currently living in a rented room in a bad part of town. Sylvia hadn't fared much better. Her design business collapsed under the weight of her debts. She was living with a friend, posting vague, victim-blaming quotes on social media that nobody liked. They were gone, truly gone from my life. I finished potting the plant and wiped the dirt from my hands. I picked up the small watering can and walked over to the section of the greenhouse I had dedicated to Arthur. It was filled with his favorite rare orchids, the ones that took years of patience to bloom. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. I touched the petals of a ghost orchid, delicate and white. I had decided what to do with the money. I wasn't going to hoard it. I was expanding the seed archive. I was starting a scholarship program for students who had been in the foster system, kids who had been left behind, just like I was. I would help them grow. I would give them the soil and the light they needed. But my parents, they were weeds, and I had finally, successfully, pulled them out by the root. I walked out of the greenhouse and into the garden, the cool evening air filling my lungs. For the first time in 29 years, I didn't feel like the girl waiting on the porch. I felt like the owner of the house. And the silence, it wasn't heavy anymore, it was free.